friends, welcome back to the Avocado Toast Budget. If you're new here, my name is Lexa, and today we are weighing the pros and cons of renting versus owning. I have gotten tons of questions on this since I have talked about how me and my partner have decided that we prefer renting to owning a home, and we never plan on actually purchasing a home. And I totally understand it because that kind of goes against what we normally think about when we think of like the typical American dream and owning a home and having kids and retiring on a beach somewhere in Costa Rica one day. But I do think that it is really important, especially as our generation with millennials and Gen Zers start to grow up, that we start to look at what we truly want and value, not just what society tells us we need to be doing. And in order to effectively do this, we need to know what the pros and cons of each option are. That way we can weigh them for ourselves and decide what works best for us. Now, I want to put a disclaimer out there that pros and cons are subjective. What is a pro to me might actually be a con to you. So just keep that in mind whenever we are talking about some of these, that these are just general things that could be seen as a pro or a con depending on your situation. But of course, everyone's situation is different, and the whole point of this video is for you to be able to decide what is best for you and your situation and your family and future. So let's go ahead and get into breaking down the pros and cons of renting versus owning. First off, we have renting pros. Number one is flexibility with moving. With renting, oftentimes you sign some sort of a contract for 6, 12, 18 months, but then after that, you're not really tied down to that apartment or home, and you have a much easier time being able to relocate and move around whenever you want to. For us, this is actually a really big pro of renting because we haven't quite decided where we want to live for the long term, so we wouldn't want to invest inside of a home when we only plan on being there for like a year or two, and then we would kind of feel stuck. So the nice thing about renting is that it does provide that flexibility with relocating and moving around. The next possible pro is that it may cost less than a mortgage. Now, of course, this depends on your cost of living and what area you're in, but personally for us, we pay less in rent than we would all costs factored in to a mortgage on a month-to-month basis. And this really is because of the next pro of renting, that your expenses are pretty predictable. You don't have to factor in things like maintenance cost or renovations, property taxes, or insurance. That's all just factored into one price. And I like to say renting is the most that you will pay, and your mortgage is the least that you will pay. Because with renting, that cost of rent covers pretty much everything, unless you have certain things like pet fees or whatever, but usually those are all one lump payment. Whereas a mortgage, that is pretty much your base level of what you're paying a month. And then you have things to consider like insurance, property taxes, unexpected repairs or renovations that you want to make. The next big pro for renting is that you are not responsible for repairs. For us, this is a big one. I love that if something happens around this place, I just have to put in a maintenance request. And for us, this is a pro because we actually have a really good experience with maintenance here. They're very timely. There is a way to contact about emergency maintenance calls, and then usually anything other than that, they're here within like 24 to 48 hours. Again, it's all very nuanced, and if you have a bad landlord, this might not actually be a pro if they're not getting around to repairing what they need to. But it is very nice to know that if something breaks, we are not financially or actually responsible for figuring out how to fix that or who we need to hire to come fix that thing. Another pro to renting is that there is often a smaller down payment. Generally, you owe like first, last month rent, or there is some sort of a security deposit. But other than that, you are not putting usually like tens of thousands of dollars in a down payment to rent. So this can make renting more accessible for people who are unable to save all of that money and pay for something like a down payment on a home, but you still need a place to live. Another pro is that there is no risk of home depreciation. Now, despite what a lot of people actually think, there are many cases where people don't actually see a profit on their home when they look at the total expense that they paid for it. And that is a risk when it comes to owning a home, that you might buy it and then it might not end up being the investment that you thought it was. Whereas when it comes to renting, you are not owning anything, so you don't have any risk of that. And finally, the last pro to renting is that there is a possibility for certain amenities to be included or for utilities to be included. That is the case for us. Everything but electric is included, so we don't have to worry about paying for gas, water, or trash, and there is a pool available to us that we do not have to pay to upkeep. Now let's look at the cons to renting. Now, one of the cons is actually the opposite of what was a pro for renting, and this is where, again, that kind of nuanced subjectivity comes in. And even though a possible pro to renting was that it could cost you less than a mortgage, a possible con to renting is that it could cost you more than a mortgage, depending on your situation and where you live. Another big con is that with the flexibility of moving that comes as a pro to renting, there's also less stability. If you rent through a landlord that is just like one person renting out their house or renting out the other portion of their duplex, you do run the risk that they can just stop renting to you and have you move out within the next 30 days. So this can be a big con to renting, that you don't really know if the place that you're living is going to be available for you to live in the future. Another con, and something that people really consider to be a big con when it comes to renting, is that there is no wealth creation. With renting, you are not putting money in to own something. I will not eventually own this apartment that I'm living in by paying rent. So that is an expense that is not going toward creating more wealth for me. You also have the possibility of bad neighbors or a bad landlord. We have found that the company that we rent through, we actually had a really bad experience with that company at a different apartment complex. But this apartment complex, we have had a really positive experience with so far. But we have had our fair share of absolutely horrid neighbors, including one that we had to call the cops on multiple times, which, if you know me, I don't call the cops for like anything unless it is absolutely necessary. So you know it had to get bad if I was bringing the cops into the situation. And I almost had to have my mom's lawyer write her a letter. So that is definitely something that you risk when it comes to renting, especially if you're renting an apartment, because if you are owning a home or renting a home, your neighbors are not as close to you as often as they are when you are all stacked on top of each other in an apartment. Another con is that with renting, you have no control over renovations. So while you are not responsible for renovations or repairs, because of that, you don't have any control. So for us, our apartment complex decided that they were going to like paint the front doors one day, and we had to like leave our doors open like a Moroccan fair.
While the rooms were exposed to the world like a Moroccan fair.
For them to like air out all day, and we had no control over that situation of when or why or how they were going to do that.
John. Oh my God. These rooms did have doors, didn't they?
And with that, if you are a creative person and you want to be able to control your space, you have less creative control with an apartment. We are allowed to paint. This wall actually came as like an accent wall. We didn't notice until like after she left, but this is great. It came like that. We're thinking that like the last renters painted this and then just no one noticed because the gray and white are kind of pretty similar. But we do have like some more creative control than some apartments allow. We can like hang things up and put some holes inside of the drywall, but there are certain places that you have like really no creative control over. You can't put any holes, you can't really hang anything up unless it's a command strip. You definitely can't be like knocking down walls or redoing cabinets or anything. And if it's a place that you plan on living in for a while and you want to be able to customize your space, you might be limited when it comes to renting and what your landlord will allow you to do. And lastly, a possible con when it comes to renting is that there might be pet restrictions. Unfortunately, some landlords prohibit certain breeds or limit you to like 1 or 2 different pets. And if you have lots of fur babies, this might become an issue. Whereas if you own a home, of course, there are legal restrictions and you never want to be owning so many pets that it puts them in danger. But you don't have to worry about things like if your landlord restricts certain breeds, or if you can only have 1 animal and you actually have like 2 or 3. So we have covered a lot of the pros and cons of renting. So let's move into the pros and cons of owning. To start with the pros, number 1, and the big one that people usually talk about when it comes to owning, is the possibility of building wealth or equity. A big reasoning behind people owning a home is so that they are investing in something that is theirs and that they are able to pass on to their family, or hopefully one day not have to pay mortgage payments on during retirement. And this can bring a lot of value to your life if you are wanting something that you have complete control over and that you have invested in. Although there are situations where it might not be the wealth builder that you thought it would be, but we will touch on that here in a little bit. Another big pro is that you have more creative control. So if you are wanting to knock down a wall or completely redo your backyard, you can do that. Of course, there are like HOA things and all of that, but within reason, you can do that. You don't have to consult your landlord if you want to put in a new faucet or change the color of your cabinets. And if this is a place that you are living in for the long haul, it can be so nice to be able to customize it in a way that works for you and your family. The next big pro of owning a home is that there are no pet fees or restrictions. So again, if you have a certain breed of a dog, you don't have to worry about your landlord saying, no, you can't have that. If you want to bring in a third cat as an addition to your family, you don't have to consult your landlord before doing so. And if you are a fur baby lover like I am, this can be a huge pro to owning. The next possible pro is the possibility of fixed payments. Of course, there are going to be things like insurance, other fees, and property taxes that can fluctuate, but you can get a mortgage payment that is fixed for the long term, so you always know exactly how much you're going to be paying on your mortgage. Whereas with renting, which is something that I actually didn't touch on when I was talking about renting, is that there is a possibility of you paying more and more every year. And we've actually run into this. It's the reason why we are putting up with another 12 months of living in a 1-bedroom when honestly we could probably benefit and afford a 2 or a 3-bedroom, because we are paying so little right now compared to what we will be paying whenever we move out. Because the reality of it is that the cost of renting goes up pretty high every single year, but it doesn't go up as much if you are renewing a contract. So that is definitely a possible pro of owning your own home, is that you don't have a landlord raising the prices on you every year. Also, if you are someone who already has or plans on building a family, having a home can be really nice because there's often a lot more room for children. So if you want to have a family in the future, the option for a lot more space or a backyard of your own can be a huge pro to owning. And then finally, more stability. As long as you are paying all of your bills on time, there's no landlord who is going to be able to decide to stop renting to you and cause you to have to up and move when you didn't plan on it. So again, if you are someone who values stability or you have a family, that can be a huge pro when it comes to owning. Now let's cover all of the cons to owning. First, and this is one that I definitely want to touch on, is that your home might not be the investment that you thought it was going to be. I think this is important to talk about because inevitably when Liz and I talk about not wanting to own a home, I get flooded with comments of people genuinely wondering how we're going to build wealth, which I think is totally fair because in society we often equate owning a home to being the main revenue for you to build wealth. So a lot of people wonder how you can navigate building wealth without owning a home. But then also I get flooded with nasty comments of people telling me that it's a stupid decision for our money and that owning a home is going to make you so much more money than if you were renting. But I want to caution you, if your biggest reason is to build equity, that might not be the best use of your money. Because by running the numbers, you might actually find out that depending on where you live, it does not make financial sense for you to own a home. And that doesn't mean that there's no reason for you to buy, because obviously all those other pros are very valid. But you want to take into account the fact that your investment inside of your house might not be the monetary investment that you planned on it being. So make sure whenever you are looking at owning a home that you consider all costs in that, because oftentimes people end up spending like $1,300 to $2,000 more a month on top of their mortgage on other costs of owning a home. So make sure that A, you can afford that, and B, you're okay with putting in that investment in every month on top of what you're already paying on your mortgage. And as I have been touching on when talking about the whole concept of building wealth inside of owning a home, there are a lot of fees to owning a home, which can be a big con for people. Things like the cost of renovations, maintenance, insurance, things break when you definitely did not expect them to at the worst times. And this is all on you both financially, but it is also your responsibility to fix, which can be really hard if you don't have a lot of time or extra resources, or you're not very handy around the house. It can be difficult navigating taking on all of that responsibility. Another con that it often is a barrier to people being able to own a home is that oftentimes there's a large down payment. The average down payment on a home is around 12%. Now, if we take that and plug in the numbers for the average price of a home, which apparently seems to be $284,000 according to Google. That's almost $30,000 that you would need for a 12% down payment on that home. That is a lot of money in comparison to first and last month's rent. And that is not including the fact that whenever you are becoming a homeowner, you definitely want to make sure to save up a bigger emergency fund and have money to cover all of those extra fees that it cost you to actually buy the home. And of course, another possible con when it comes to owning a home is that there is a long-term commitment. Now, a lot of people don't don't find this to actually be a con because they really value being able to stay in one place and build roots, and they don't mind having that long-term commitment. But if you are someone who sees your career changing within the near future, or you don't know if the place that you're living is where you want to stay for a while, keep in mind that in order to get the value that you are going to want to get out of your home, you need to stay there for at least like 10 or more years. So you want to make sure to ask yourself, are you wanting to stay where you are and live in that home for the next decade? So of course, like I have been saying throughout this video, there are other things you're going to want to be considering. I am sure that there are other pros and cons that I didn't mention, but these are often the very common ones that I see and that I think are really important to talk about and to take into consideration when you are deciding whether it's better for you to rent or to own a home. And either way, it is all about what works for you. The reason that we've decided that renting is better for us is that the pros to renting outweigh the cons for our specific situation. All that matters is that you know your options and you are able to weigh the pros and cons to decide what is best for you and your family. So I really hope that you enjoyed and you learned something interesting. If this video helped, make sure to give it a big thumbs up. It really helps out the YouTube algorithm, helps boost this video to the top. That way more people can find this content. And definitely let me know down in the comments below whether you prefer to rent or own, any experiences you have had with either one of those, and what is a big pro or a con for you in this situation. I really hope that you enjoyed, and I will see you all next time. Bye.